This is Cathleen Scott, and I'd like to welcome you to the Cathleen Scott podcast. I'm here today with Nayef Mubarak, who's going to talk to us about everything immigration related. We're going to also tackle some of the ongoing issues with immigration deportations, as well as the Supreme Court recent rulings. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started and dive right in. I'm excited to hear a little bit about your background. Why don't we start there?
Sure. Well, personally, I was born in Brooklyn. My family came to Orlando, Florida when I was about 6 or 7 years old. Immigrant parents from Palestine, and I've been practicing immigration over 15 years now. And I opened my own firm about 9 years ago.
Congrats on that. And I've heard nothing but good things. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a bit of a roller coaster ride lately on the immigration front. You must be very busy.
To say the least. It's been very intense. I practiced during Trump 1.0 and really kind of came into the mindset that, it's fine. We survived. We got better. We had more tools available in the end, but it's actually significantly worse this time around. So.
And what do you mean by that? I think I know, but tell us, Nayef, what's going on?
Well, during the first administration, it did seem like kind of clunky, reactionary, wasn't well prepared. However, this time around, they have intentionally put things in place, like these January 20th executive orders that we're now seeing being used. I'll just give a quick example of that. It's very calculated in the sense that they have expanded what's called expedited removal to anyone in the country, not a certain limitation from the border, who's been here less than 2 years, who has encountered with ICE less than 2 years. So they are intentionally getting the Department of Homeland Security to dismiss deportation proceedings, and then ICE is waiting in the immigration courtroom to remove these people. So in the past, we had procedures and due process, and it wasn't as calculated as this, but they have like a domino effect in place, and I'm really truly seeing all of the collateral effects, and it's well thought out. It's
orchestrated.
It's tough. It's orchestrated. It's a definitely different environment than the first time around.
And so you mentioned two things there. It's orchestrated, and is there particular groups of people who you feel like there's a target? Let me just ask that again. Are there a particular group of people that you feel like are a target for these new?
I would definitely think that in rhetoric, the scapegoating and the dehumanization is definitely South Americans, Central Americans. Everybody is being affected. I mean, these policies in place are truly damaging. The only group that have yet to see a Biden policy be revoked are the Ukrainians. And I think on paper, that kind of speaks for itself.
Interesting. Okay, so we have a lot to talk about. One thing is about deportation. I mean, just in general, we're seeing, Kristi Noem's coming on to television telling people to self-deport. Tell us, if you have one thing you want people to know about what's actually happening with deportation, what do you want listeners to know?
Yeah, so we've seen the propaganda video stating that if you are forced to leave, you'll never come back. And if you leave on your own, you may have more options in the future. This is legally false because of the fact that there are waivers, one, for deportation that many people qualify under the law, at least for now. And number two, just because you leave without a deportation order does not mean you have other penalties. So our law is very clear. If you've been in the United States unlawfully for more than a year, the second you leave our borders, you are now barred from re-entering for 10 years, which is the same amount of time as the penalty for a deportation order. So it's very misleading to think that because you don't have a deportation in your name, that you may be eligible in the future for something. However, anybody who's considering leaving, which might be a reasonable option for some people who choose not to live in this environment or under fear, should consult with an immigration attorney to know the consequences of said departure. Leaving without a deportation order does not mean you have great chances of coming back. It could be the same as having one.
What would you recommend that folks do who are in that situation? Contact an immigration lawyer?
Absolutely. I think many people have been kind of hidden in the shadows and are scared to come forward. And even contacting an immigration attorney is pretty intimidating to them. So like for those with family members that have been here for so long, many people's parents have been here 20 plus years with no status. Definitely my recommendation is to collect as many documents as possible to establish somebody's ties and presence here. So you want to show timelines, bank accounts, medical records, children's transcripts, so we can show how long this person has been here without, negative interactions with the law. This might be very handy if they end up in detention. Definitely speak to an immigration attorney to determine your options, if any, and before making any hasty, life-changing decisions.
There are people who are living in our communities, people who kids go to school here, who work at restaurants, shop at the grocery store, utilize banking, who contribute to our economy in many ways, not only as employees, but also as oftentimes as consumers, right? I mean, there are people living our community, as you say, like living in the shadows. And so there's something I'd like to have clarity on. We often hear people use this phrase, well, people have come to this country illegally. And so I would love for you to I would love to have a straight understanding of like, what does it mean? Like, what does it actually look like? Can someone come to the country, quote, legally? And I'd really love for you to just get your expertise on that.
So I think people coming legally or somebody being illegal or legal is dangerous waters as adjectives as far as dehumanizing people, right? Somebody has a legal status or they don't. An individual themselves should not be deemed illegal or legal, first and foremost. Number two, our laws allow for individuals to apply for asylum at the border. And so would that then qualify as legal? In my opinion, yes. They've presented themselves. They've applied for asylum. Being in our country, complying with our own asylum laws. We also have people who've come from Europe on visa waiver programs and overstays. There's several million people who've entered the U.S. with legal status and overstayed. So it's who are we going to cherry pick as a legal status or unlawful? It's a very vast definition, but I see it, and you probably see it, being used in very particular instances and groups of people.
So you said something interesting there. I think probably a lot of people who supported the president, right, for election or re-election this time, felt like people had a system in their countries that would allow them to somehow leave Colombia, leave Guatemala, leave various other countries and come here, and that there's some process for them to do that through a legal means, and that doesn't seem to always be the case. And so what do you want to, let's dispel that myth right now.
I think the biggest myth is doing it the right way and the legal way, as if there's a queue to go stand in line and apply for a resident card. Most people don't realize that in order to petition for your sibling, if I'm an American and I want to sponsor my brother, that wait time is 15 to 16 years. On top of it, if you're an employer wanting to sponsor an individual, the processing time for perm labor certification is about 3 or 4 years. I cannot tell you how many times after Trump 1.0 and 2.0, people call and say, I want to sponsor my neighbor. He's a good guy. He deserves citizenship, thinking it's that easy to simply approve somebody and vet them as a good human being and magically they'll get status. It does not work like that. In many cases, there are no avenues. Just like our Dreamers and our DACA recipients, that is the greatest example of children who were brought here with no decision of their own, no intention of their own, have been lawfully abiding here for years. But because of the manner they entered the United States, they have no way to correct their status.
I grew up in South Florida. It's a very multilingual, diverse community. And my kids are in their 20s and they went to school with people who they had no idea what their status was. It's not like kids ask each other, but we have friends who have come to this country when they were children. It wasn't a choice they made. It was a choice their parents made. They've been living here. They speak fluent English. They view the United States as their country. They're loyal Americans. But they don't fall into some of the, quote, DACA requirements. And now they're being forced to make these decisions in their 20s to go to a country that they don't even view as their home. And in many cases, they've never even been there before. Can you shed some light on the legalities of that and how we got there?
Sure. So first of all, that DACA is a great example of people wanting folks to do things the right way, but there is no correct way. As you mentioned, many of these undocumented children came here with no intention of their own, no action of their own. And it's not until they're applying for college and they ask mom and dad for certain paperwork that they have a really hard conversation with their parents that they're valedictorians, but they have no status and they cannot go to college. And the issue with that is we have a pretty unforgiving immigration system that, due to the unlawful entry, even if you were a minor child who cannot make a decision, you have no way to correct your status. So this myth or this idea that people should do things the right way when they've never done anything wrong in the first place, and then they have no way to correct their status, is really misleading and puts the onus on an individual who has DACA as if they've done something wrong or are some type of criminal, when in reality they were brought here to no fault of their own, and our government and our system does not have a solution for them. So I think that is the biggest misconception when it comes to DACA, and even people believing that somebody should do things the right way.
And what are the options that are there for folks who are falling? So you're either 22, 23 years old, you missed the DACA cutoff, right? Which means you can't apply for any type of financial aid, as you say. You can't go to college now in the state of Florida. And so what can that person do?
It's extremely difficult. I mean, some people have to look at either, if they have temporary protected status as an option, allowing them to work, if they qualify for DACA. In many cases, unfortunately, we tell people you have no option. It's better for you to do nothing. So even when we have an individual of extraordinary ability, we have visas I have an individual with patents who can benefit the United States at the national level. And our government has said, yes, you're a person of extraordinary ability, but they cannot get the green card or reach their status they need to because of how they were brought here to the country. There is no forgiveness. There is no waiver. There is no way to correct that. And that becomes like you have a ticket to the show, but you cannot get over that barrier of how you came here or how you were brought here in that situation.
Wow. And that is something extraordinary, because we're kind of living through a moment in history where there are more jobs to fill than there are workers to fill them. So it seems ironic almost, if you're an alien and you landed on the planet, they go, oh, look at the United States. They have all these jobs and lots of opportunity, and people who actually want to come here to leave the only country they've known, which takes incredible courage, to come in search of a better life. And yet we're not going to find a pathway to give people who want to work the opportunity to work when we actually need labor. So I'm curious what your view on that is.
So I think the U.S. government has probably failed its own population about educating them about who's looking to correct their status. Because when you have the same conversation, are these the drug lords that are coming over? I think it's pretty clear to say that most Americans, if not all, have no issues with those people being deported, right? However, a lot of these people, these big construction companies in Florida, when Governor DeSantis passed his SB, I want to say 1216 bill, I can't remember, a couple of years ago, and all of these construction companies were up in arms because their employees left the state of Florida out of fear. So we need to make a connection between our labor force in this country and what illegal immigration means. When we impact the populations that are unable to drive, who cannot get driver's license, if we truly want safer conditions on the road, wouldn't we want to know who's in our country? Wouldn't we want them to have insurance? But when we prevent these people from being able to access things and provide greater security for the biggest population, we're putting ourselves in more danger, in my opinion. And I think there's a disconnect between the big, large companies who are supporting figures who want to deport every single person and very harsh immigration action, and then realizing that they are kind of cutting off their own hand when their labor force starts to disappear. And I think that's the big shock, is there's a lot of misinformation, and that has been intentionally done to create fear and to create a culprit for our problems, not realizing that many of these people are the solutions for a lot of our problems when it comes to the workforce or the labor units, especially, and even not labor. We're talking about white collar jobs, doctors, physicians. If you saw the headline 2 days ago, they've paused all international student visas. That includes some 6,000 international medical students coming to study and train here, which means our already burdened health system has now lost their annual summer 6,000 or so internships and trainees. And we're definitely going to feel that in our medical systems, without a doubt.
I feel like I read a statistic the other day that the average doctor age is 55, 57 years old. And so the worst thing we could be doing is discouraging people who actually want to be physicians in the healthcare field in our country from coming in to do that. I mean, I guess you never know, you're excluding the next Einstein or the next brilliant mind or the next person who's going to further discover the advancement of a cure for cancer. It's that is a risk that we're taking, right?
Absolutely. And I think, we do background checks. We do vet applicants. This idea that, President Biden was handing out statuses to people without without background checks, I think is not fair. And I think we need to come to a table and come to an agreement that we need immigrants. This country is built on immigrants. The workforce, everything about it is reliant on it. And by not having a system in place that creates and motivates people to come here, and to do things the right way, then you do have this population of doing things the wrong way or unlawfully. And so we might be creating our own problem and continuing to perpetuate it.
So something big happened in the news today, and just for our listeners, it is May 30th, 2025. So the Supreme Court has been very active. It's one of the most active Supreme Court ever. Yeah. Usually by May we're done, right? But the opinions keep coming out. So tell us a little bit about what happened today.
Today, the Supreme Court had a case heard basically qualifying or challenging the Trump administration's ability to end a Biden program. So the Biden administration had a program allowing for humanitarian parole, allowing people to come to the United States lawfully after they've been vetted, after they secured a sponsor, and the right to work for a 2-year period. So people have already been approved, and then the Trump administration comes into power January 20th and says, nope, we're canceling all of these programs, even if you are in the middle of this 2-year period. So revoking people's status, quite literally pulling it out from under them. So the Supreme Court ruled today that they did have the authority to do just that. Just like last week, they said that has the authority to end the TPS programs for Venezuela and Haiti. And in Florida, we have the largest population. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people with TPS work authorization. So this will affect our state, and this will affect hundreds of thousands of lives. And then think about the extended family of these people whose lives are going to change.
A couple of questions to ask about that. TPS is protective status, right? Just so we're
temporary protective status.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. We love our abbreviations here.
The alphabet soup of immigration law. So what is that? What's the practical effect of that? Meaning they're no longer able to be here.
So temporary protected status is the authority of DHS to designate certain countries who have been troubled with natural disaster, war, or certain issues for a temporary period to allow them to remain here. Haiti, for example, was the earthquake from 2011, and then the ongoing continued issues that plague that country. They have the right to work, they're protected from deportation, and that does not lead to a permanent status. Okay. So that's what they basically allowed to end.
Eliminated.
And
for
so let's certain
talk about
portions.
Yeah, so that's been eliminated. Let's talk about the trickle-down effect of that. You're a landlord, you've been leasing to a family, they've now learned that they no longer have TPS status here. Now what, they leave, you're stuck, now the lease is, these are consequences no one talks about. We want to humanize the person that's being, potentially deported or losing their status, but there's also a trickle-down effect from that, right?
Yeah, and I think you're right. That's what, when the neighbors start calling and they say they want to help their neighbor, they didn't realize that this is the people, these hardworking nurses or doctors or janitorial coworkers from all of our hotels in Florida. These were the people that the administration was going to target, so it has a huge effect. It has a huge impact. You have these young kids who are American who now don't know their parents' futures, if they're in limbo. Will they, and we're seeing on the news quite scarily, the people being abducted by ICE agents. So you have them, the government taking away TPS and these protections that were promised for at least another year or another 6 months, and then having all their information, and then ICE kind of sweeping them up.
Wow. What's the final thought you want to leave listeners with? Just your view from the immigration world.
So I think everyone needs to take pause when they're reading these headlines. A lot of newer, even immigration attorneys, I'm in so many forums, and the sky is literally falling for us every day. And quite literally it is, but it's important to read the headlines and understand what it means. So when they say they're pausing international students, we're talking about a $44 billion industry for our country. We're talking about 6,000 medical graduates. When they end temporary protected status, think about all of the people in Florida who are working, the hundreds of thousands of Haitians and Venezuelans, and how that impacts us. The system does not have an option. And I think people need to understand that the system is broken. And if we had proper ways for people to obtain status, there would be less likely to have undocumented. And just because somebody is undocumented or without status does not make them a criminal. The majority of these people do not have criminal history, right? And we see that by this administration constantly showing the same couple of images from El Salvador, trying to really drum up fear. Some of those people look pretty intimidating, but in reality, I know my clients are the 62-year-old man who has a 10-year-old disabled daughter, and he's the only caretaker for her, and he was in detention for 6 weeks, and she was without her father. Or my client who's never been to Mexico, he's been here since he's 4 years old, and he's 25 and cannot get status. He's married to a U.S. citizen, but because of the way his parents brought him here, the doors are all closed on him. So we need to ask questions about why are there so many people in our country without status, and why isn't there an actual solution?
And whose job is it to find that solution? Is Congress's job? Is that part of the
Congress?
issue?
I mean, that would be Congress, right? They've made it a political issue where each one is punting it left and right. This is when I started practicing. I mean, in 2010, I was practicing. 2014, we had the largest immigration bill that was going to be reformed since the 80s, and it was going to cure a lot of these issues. But politics came into play. Republicans didn't want to support President Obama. Under President Biden, he were going to do a southern border bill that was bipartisan and gave the Dreamers a solution. President Trump started tweeting, "Don't support this bill." Republicans toe the line, "Don't support the bill." So we are perpetually creating a problem, which creates a conversation, and then I think creates support for either party, whichever way you stand on. Why, as Americans, I think we should ask the question: why are we still talking about this? Why is this still an issue for 3 or 4 elections? Right. And why haven't we found a solution?
And why haven't we found a solution that actually could benefit the country? I mean, individuals who want to work could get jobs, we could tax them. That would actually generate revenue.
I think there is a study about how many millions of dollars, or if not more billions, do undocumented people pay with their I-10 numbers that they are not entitled to benefits for, or how many thousands of dollars in government fees. There's a $1 billion industry housing foreign nationals in these jails, these immigration detention centers, and then we pay bonds. We're choosing a inhumane way to monetize the immigration system rather than focusing on finding permanent solutions for people who can make our country better and continue to do so. But we're only focusing on the negative people. There are bad people. There's no doubt about that. There are bad people sometimes in this country. There are bad immigrants sometimes. But the majority of immigrants are law-abiding with minimal, if not zero, criminal history. And we're not focusing on finding a solution for our neighbors and for our colleagues and for our students. And that's what I think that Americans need to ask themselves as to why is it still a problem for over 10 years that we're talking about immigration reform and we've had nothing to show for it.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Cathleen Scott podcast. We hope this was fun and informative. We'll catch you on the next one. You can find us online at scottlawteam.com or floridalaborlawyer.com. Thank you for joining.